Now, of course, there's a wider discussion to be had around the role of creativity in sports and sports coaching. So we thought we'd follow up this demonstration by having a conversation with someone who's passionate about creativity in sports and coaching, and someone who we've been working with for a short while. So that person is Nigel Redman. This is what he looked like in his pomp and prime, if I can say that without being dismissive now. He is a former England rugby player with Bath, England and the Lions. He is now, more importantly, from our point of view, head of performance team development for England Rugby. And more interestingly, he was also had oversight and managed the British Olympic swimming teams in both Tokyo and Rio, I think, and you achieved record medal hauls in that. And he's fascinated and passionate about using creative problem-solving techniques to generate success. So we're going to talk about process, sports coaching, and creativity. Can I invite Nigel to the stage, please? Take a seat, Nigel.
Good to see you.
Now, some of you, eagle-eyed, before I ask Nigel the first question, have seen that we brought a rugby ball. I'm not going to risk tackling him. But we're going to offer this ball to the person that comes up with the best question at the end, the most creative question that we accept. So he might sign it, although he's refused to sign it yet because you might not want a signed ball. It might devalue it, I think was your point. But I'll put that there and we'll keep that to one side and we'll leave about 10 minutes for questions at the end. How are you today, Nigel?
Very good.
Very good.
You.
So we've talked before. Let's cut straight to it. Why creativity in sports and sports coaching? What's the importance of it?
I think it's important to move the sport on. Mm-hmm. I think the athletes themselves need creative coaches, sports scientists, leaders, in order to be game changers. Mm-hmm. And I think one of our responsibilities as a national governing body, mm-hmm. and also the pathway that we have, so the young players coming through, is to actually look at how we can change the game going forward. So, for many reasons really, but to make it more entertaining, so that people come and watch, mm-hmm. but also more entertaining and more accommodating for people who want to play. Mm-hmm. And certainly the sport of rugby union, it's a contact sport. There's been a lot of press around head injuries. And so we need some creative solutions to what the game can look like to encourage more people to come play, to reduce the head injury, and to keep the game as an exciting game. Mm-hmm. A game which, as I say, it's a game for all, both men, women, and we just need to keep moving it forward. Well,
I'll come on to people's reactions to this advocacy for creativity in a minute, but do you see a lot of these problems as being non-trivial problems that the sport needs to solve?
I think it's an interesting one because I always say that in many forms of life, business, sport, we truly need to fall in love with the problem before we understand mm-hmm. what it is. Mm-hmm. And I think too often we see a hurdle and we address the hurdle, but the hurdle's not the problem.
Yeah.
And so how do we fall in love with the problem itself? Mm-hmm. How do we dig deeper? And there's a very simple story that I tell about my wife. So I call this problem solving. It's not about the bins. So on a Tuesday, my wife shouts at me, "Nigel, put the bins out, they stink, we get rats." So I take the bins out and I come in and I realise that my wife is still angry at me. So it's not about the bins.
Okay.
What else have I done that's really upset my wife this week?
Are you going to share with the audience?
No, but it's that ability. You know, you said right on the front, it could be anything, honestly. Agreed. But you said at the front about curiosity.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about.
You know, and how do we maintain our curiosity? And the other thing is, how do we make sure that our ego doesn't get in the way of our mm-hmm. curiosity mm-hmm. when we want to show people how much we know? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes in a bid to gain credibility, our ego takes over and we cease to be curious. Mm-hmm.
So are you suggesting that people aren't curious enough? And I'm asking this question because I did read somewhere that you argued you were a curious child, but in the positive way. You took your family television apart once to figure out how it worked. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. Did it go back together again afterwards? Fair enough.
It went into the garage
Fair enough.
with a lot of other things that I took apart.
So what got you into this? Was it partly your own curiosity? Are you just a naturally curious person?
I'd like to think I am curious. I'd like to think that I'm a lifelong learner. I'm not a traditional learner, if you like. Sometimes I find reading difficult, but I do get engrossed in trying to understand problems.
Okay.
And one of the things that actually changed my life, and it was recent, around coaching, which was, I had an argument with, it was actually a professor leading a particular program I was on. And he was talking about understanding. And I said, look, I've spent all my life trying to understand. Trying to understand from other people's perspective, trying to put myself in their shoes. And he said, Nigel, the role of the coach is not to understand their context. The role of the coach is to help the coachee understand. And I think, again, with problem solving, how do we understand and see the context and what we're working in? How do we understand the problem that we're faced with? And how do we fall in love with the problem?
So let's talk about the types of problems that you feel you're encountering here. Do they have particular characteristics that you...
No, I'll get one very simple one.
Okay, go ahead.
Which is, when I introduce myself now, I don't introduce myself as somebody who's played rugby, who's coached rugby, who's working now in sport.
Yeah.
And I ask the audience, why do you think I don't introduce myself as somebody who works in sport and used to play rugby?
Because you want them to be curious, to know who you are.
Absolutely. Because I was in the past, I found I would gain instant credibility by telling people what I'd done. But actually, if you change the context of the audience, I don't like rugby. Oh, another motivational speaker. Oh, can't believe they've wheeled somebody else out to give us a chat. Don't like sport. So all of a sudden, we're actually switching off people's curiosity before we've even started. So sometimes, just in the way we introduce ourselves as a human being, can either draw people in, or people will jump to their own conclusions and go, I don't like rugby.
Okay. So how we introduce ourselves is important to stimulating people's curiosity. Are there other things that you've learned in and around sport that have helped to do that?
Yeah. The question, what else?
Okay.
2 words, which in fairness, if someone thinks they know the answer. I'll give you another example. So in sport, I will speak to a sports scientist and say, tell me about being a scientist. Well, being a scientist means we're curious. Okay, so what are you curious about? Well, when the coach has a problem or the athlete has a problem, as a sports scientist, we'll go and explore. We'll explore academic papers, we're going to explore research. Until what? Until we get the answer. Then what do? We tell the coach what the answer is. And what happens when the coach says that's not the answer? And when you get the answer, what happens to your creativity and curiosity? And in a lot of cases, once people feel they have the answer, they stop being curious because they've got the answer. But if it's not your answer, not the answer you're looking for, because you've got, as a coach, you'll have complexity on, of the fixture list, the competition, the other people, the dynamics of the team, lots of things from a sporting context. And the scientists gone out and they found the answer to one of them. And so how do we maintain that curiosity, that deep into, and ask another question? Well, if this isn't the answer, what else should we be looking for here? Tell me a little bit more about the problem. Because I've taken it as this, but you're telling me it's not that. It's something else. And Neil, I'll give you an example of an Olympic coach who coached an athlete who, at the British trial, swam 7 seconds slower. So I said, how did she swim 7 seconds? What did you do in your practice which helped this athlete to swim 7 seconds slower in the trial that she's ever swam before? She actually got to the Olympic Games by swimming a different event and ended up winning 2 silver medals. And he said, I never realised how much the London Olympics was playing on her mentality, her psychological. And he only really looked at the technical, tactical, physical, and didn't really appreciate that actually the brain was this athlete's brain was getting in the way. So whatever he tried on the technical, tactical wasn't working until he accepted and acknowledged that actually we need to take there's something else playing up here.
Different perspectives.
Just different perspectives.
Some people
which is what sports bars does. It just changes the perspective.
Indeed. Well, thank you for the nod. Indeed, very good. But it's interesting. I think some people might be quite surprised in the audience that you've got Olympic winning coaching going on, which is not looking at these other perspectives. So why are people, you would expect, I personally would have expected coaches to have a grasp on the sort of different perspectives that might be playing on a swimmer's mind. So what's going on?
A lot of it is tradition.
Okay.
And again, from a traditionally, this is how we coach swimming. And so having somebody like me who'd never worked in swimming before, and I'm somebody who's big on credibility, and somebody said to me, how did you maintain credibility in a sport that you know nothing about? And what it allowed me to do was to say, you're right, I don't know anything about swimming, so why don't you start telling me what you know about swimming? And then we'd start to have a conversation. I'd say, well, that's interesting. That sounds, so tell me what your biggest problems are. Where are your biggest barriers? That sounds like communication. I know a little bit about communication. Why don't we talk about communication? Or that sounds a little bit around the mindset. Now, I understand mindset, or if I don't, I'll tell you what, I'll signpost you to someone who knows more about mindset than me. And actually, Neil, when COVID hit and I was working at swimming, for years I've been asking them, why do you need to get wet to get fit? I couldn't understand why Adam Peaty, who's the best breaststroker on the planet, would train doing freestyle. And I'm like, but if he doesn't need to do breaststroke to get fit, why can't he get fit on a bike? Why can't he get fit on a row? Why does he have to swim? And what COVID did was shut pools. So all of a sudden we had to think differently. So while everybody was going, oh, crikey, the pools are shut, I was sat behind Zoom going, now we've got to start thinking differently. How can we support the athletes with their fitness? But also from a mentality perspective, if you're swimming 7,000 meters every day looking at tiles at the bottom of the pool, how's the social aspect of relationship? How do we build communication, social, the psychological effects of just, down. Well, actually now we're on land, we're on Zoom, we can communicate with each other whilst we're working hard. And also the desire to get back in the pool when pools were open had gone through the roof.
So how did that dry training go? Did it?
Went really well. The coach hated it though, because many coaches are defined by what they do. How can I be a swim coach without a swimming pool? And so one of the things that we did was encourage the coaches to be on Zoom just to show presence, just to show that they're present, they're on screen, and they're just there. They don't have to direct, they don't have to say anything, but the athlete can see that they're present.
So one implication that I'm taking away from what you're saying is the narrowness of our expertise sometimes is a barrier to both curiosity and creative problem solving. Is that a fair?
You said it, not me, but I'm not going to disagree with you.
I'm happy to say it.
I'll tell you, we talk about T-shaped coaches, breadth of knowledge, depth of understanding. And then we have specialist coaches that have a very, very special, in the same way as you get everything. But how can we be there's a while ago I read a book called Sacred Hoops by a basketball coach called Phil Jackson. And in the book he talked about how he used creativity to sell a particular attacking style to a team that was full of stars. And he had to convince Michael Jordan, who was one of the best basketball players on the planet, to play in a different way. And he said he did it. When he was there, he used to have learning clubs where he used to take a book and take a chapter of a book and then read it. One of the books that he mentioned was a book called Beginner's Mind. And it's a direct translation from Japanese into English. And I thought, I'm going to go and read this book. And it's not an easy read because it's a direct translation. But at the start of the book, there's a quote which I love. I'm going to paraphrase and bastardize it a little bit. But the essence of it is, the mind of the expert is full, the mind of the beginner has possibility. So how can you as an expert in your field adopt a beginner's mind around topics that we think we're the expert in. How can we actually go into this with a beginner's, a curious mind?
So do you think your move into British swimming led the way here to bring in people from different, not only sports, but maybe different fields?
I think my boss was from field hockey originally, and he'd worked in different sports. He brought me in to work with the coaches. And then we started to introduce different professions, different people with different experiences.
Okay.
And then mentor the coaches to find the links, how does this relate to what I do? And it didn't always work. But, bringing somebody in from the elite military or football, or we brought one guy in from John Lewis, partnership. He talked about working together. And I was there thinking, I wonder how this is going to go down. And the coaches thought, hey, that was brilliant. Loved it. He came in from the store down in up in Watford. And he talked about the history of John Lewis and the essence of working together in order to benefit together. It's a great story. But I thought, will I now have to mentor the coaches to find the links? And on that occasion, I didn't have to. It was they all had the link.
Yeah, sometimes you have to do that facilitation to explain.
I think it's really important that we don't just assume that everybody's heard it, understood it, and will act on it in the way that I did. And I do believe that individualised learning. So what did that mean to you? How would you use it? And it doesn't always work. I mean, I brought in one series. I brought in somebody from the Special Forces and somebody who was in his 70s who'd worked with everybody from Alex Ferguson to Steve. He's worked in rugby, cricket, all over. And the feedback on the first session was, Harry's from the military, Bill's from football, I'm a swim coach, don't see it. So I thought, I'll change the introduction. So I talked about the people around you will help you learn. If there's something that you don't see where the link is, I'm sure the link will be in the room somewhere. And at the end of the session, Harry's from the military, Bill's from football, I don't understand the link to swimming. So it doesn't always work. I don't think that should stop you or anybody from doing it.
Well, creative thinking is about taking risks. We can't predict the outcomes.
No, not at all. And that's the fun of it.
When you're doing this work, do you use the C word of creativity, or is that a word that gets in the way sometimes of this sort
with
of practice?
some people, it gets in the way.
Because
some people love the pragmatism of this is what I do, this is who I am. I haven't got to where I've got to from being creative. And then we explain that actually creativity is born out of pragmatism. I bring in comedians who do improv. But they don't just turn up and do improv. There's certain frameworks that they put in place to help people think creatively. Organisations like, there's an organisation called What If, who, again, creative thinking organisation. There's people in Google who share some of the frameworks that they use for their creative thinking. Just, again, to rephrase the question, to take a different perspective.
I'm thinking about one of the other barriers. We're seeing more use of digital technologies and data, which creates a more objective approach. As our colleague Chris McLeod said in the podcast, he called it predictive. It's more predictive. Is that also a barrier here?
Crikey. Again, to some, maybe. We're looking at coach succession planning at the moment, and I've stressed over and over again, it's not an algorithm that you put names in and you get one out. There's still that sense of gut, and how do you trust your gut? If the information's telling you one thing, your own experience and your gut feel is something else. And look, I worked with a sports scientist many years ago who said, do you recommend books to coaches? I said, yeah, sometimes. Do you recommend, and he quoted the book Bounce from Matthew Syed. I said, yes, I do. He said, you need to stop. I said, why? He said, because it's rubbish. And it's rubbish for these reasons. So I said, so let me get this right. You're going to stop me recommending this book? Yes. So when you've stopped me recommending books, should we burn them and invade Wales? And he said, you can't compare me. I said, if you're telling me that certain things we can and certain things we can't, then surely where's the exploration to actually come up with a point of view? Then we come to this particular person who's read different academic papers. At least then we've got a starting point. And he started to again, just to see it from a different perspective around, look, it may be written by a journalist to sell. It gives somebody a starting point. It gives somebody that you can then say, right, now read this, because this will give a different perspective, and then read this, and start to make your own mind up. And I think that's important as well.
Yeah. And it makes me think about education as well, because many of the people I've met when we've been developing and testing sports bots have a sports science background. They've got a degree or a master's in it. Is the education system too narrow?
In what sense?
We're giving people too narrow expertise and knowledge early on, whereas we maybe should be giving them broader education around problem solving.
The interesting thing about looking at sports science is they will have an area of expertise, and actually part of the creative problem for sports is to help somebody to move out of their expertise and feel confident in just sharing what they see, feel and notice about athletes and other, without feeling they're treading on professional toes. To have this air of, well, actually we can talk freely here, and take people and help people to move out of their expertise. We can always go back to it. But many people in sports science, they think they're working in teams. But I've heard debriefs where somebody say, you're right, Neil, I understand what you're saying about Neil, but he's really good in the gym. Or, I've noticed that with Neil, but he's a world-class nutritionist. Well, actually, when you're under pressure at Olympic Games, we expect you to be a world-class nutritionist. We also expect you to work as part of a team. And it's the way they communicate, build relationships. There's a whole menu of humanistic traits and qualities that are lacking. We can always fall back on our expertise.
Sure.
But we can still grow ourselves as human beings.
You said something once about people need to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable, if you see what I mean.
It's a phrase used a lot.
Yeah.
My experience is many people, they don't like out of their comfort zone because they don't like that feeling of being vulnerable. However, if the environment allows for vulnerability, because we don't judge and we don't jump metaphorically, and we just, no idea is a bad idea, then actually we can nurture that and and help people to feel comfortable being out of their comfort zone. And again, going back to teams, I did a debrief after a world championship, and I brought in an external facilitator who went round and asked each person of the coaching team, the sports science team, what do we do well? What does swimming do well, and what do we need to be better at? We're really well as a team, brilliant as a team, and we need to be better at X. We're really good as a team, need to be better at Y. They come to me and said, we are really good as a team, and we could be so much better at being a team. And people were like, roll their eyes. So then I started to look at, if we put collaboration in the middle of a continuum with working in isolation at one end, what's down the other end? And I started to ask people, working in isolation, working in a silo, working with a contractor, collaboration, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. And then I found somebody who said, there is a transdisciplinary. And I said, well, what's that? He said, it's where you get experts, but they don't know the answer. But they're really, leaves your ego at the door, there's no judgment, and you just challenge. And I said, what does that feel like? It's like working in the grey. How long can you spend it? Not long, because people like then to have the comfort blanket of their knowledge.
Security.
And I think at times knowledge, although people say knowledge is power, my experience says knowledge can be the biggest inhibitor of growth.
Indeed.
Particularly if you don't want new knowledge, because the knowledge you've got is your IP, it's what you're about.
Indeed.
If you look vulnerable and not know, then that might reflect poorly on you.
Indeed. That's fascinating. I'm going to stop there and open up the floor to questions, since we try and keep to time. We've got 5 to 10 minutes. As you can see, Nigel has got a wealth of knowledge and insights to share with us. I see this lady here already with the first hand. Put your hands up. We're going to bring microphones around just to make sure this works. So if we can hurry quickly.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. I'm wondering, we talk now a lot about, creative problem solving and having all kinds of creative techniques, diversity and so on, I can see that. But how about defining and refining the problem? Do you also use creativity techniques to really find unusual questions, to start first in kind of defining what is the actual problem?
I'd like to think so. I think supporting people to ask better questions. And again, that's the spirit behind Sports Sparks, to redefine and asking different questions, getting people to move their position on something so they see it from a different and feel it from a different perspective. It's also to challenge the norm and groupthink. So who in the team is the positive deviant who asks the question when everyone thinks, 2 minutes we'll be gone? They'll ask the question just to stop people in their tracks to think, oh, that's interesting, I never thought of it like that. And I think it's really important if we can do that.
Thank you. Good
And
question.
move the person around, because otherwise people just think, oh, it's negative Nick here. It always comes up with that. But I think it's important.
Question at the front here, Andrew in the white shirt. Maybe just wait for the microphone. I think Sarah can get here very quickly.
Thank you. How do you deal with potential showstoppers like brain injury, which could be a fundamental threat to the sport?
And again, it can be. We have got experts working on it at the moment and looking at what the game of the future will be looking like. There's all sorts of. So I'll give you an example. Many of our professional teams now wear instrumented mouthguards, which give real-time data on how many blows. And so we're looking at not just that, we're looking at how many games teams play, players play, size of squads, so that there are less. And also, the big change, I think, in time will be, we'll look at how we can still train, how we can train without the contact, and still provide players who have to play in those contact arenas. But it really is around reducing. And actually, my understanding is the stats are very positive. It's not as bad as, but of course, the people who need the help, quite rightly, are having a voice, and the authorities and the World Rugby and other contact sports are standing up and taking notice, which is important.
The lady there at the back, and then the gentleman here afterwards by the edge.
Thank you, really interesting. I'm just trying to find a way to phrase this, but and maybe it's a question to both of you actually, because I'm coming from performing arts, and so I know what you're talking about in terms of liveness, yeah, and the psychology of the moment, really, and the complexity of the different aspects that you've explained, coming into that come in together, but ultimately they have to come together perfectly for that moment because it's time-based, yeah, the sport. So I wanted to know what you thought about how you thought that could be dealt with. And I'm maybe thinking back to the app, Neil, and how that actually is relative to AI and what AI can do with that side. And I think a lot of what you're talking about is the psychology side. So are we talking sports science, or does psychology come into sports science anyway? Because I don't know a lot about it.
Yes, sports psych is very much part of science. And I think if we start to look at, ask the question, do we work for the athlete or the performer, or do we all work for the performance? And if we're all working for the performance, then the performer, the athlete, has a part and a role in that, the same way as the rest of us do. And when we talk about bringing it all together so it looks great, I think part of it is also, when it's not great, the ability to make it look great for those around you. So from a psychological perspective, if things aren't going well, then how can I still continue through this? Because I can't just stop. But also then the ability to reflect, to accept that we've got to adapt and learn and move on in the moment.
In the moment, yeah.
Because too often we'll start being self-critical, which will almost stop us in the moment. But it's that ability to continue, to just let it go and think about the next thing. And we do a lot of work in that area as well, around, it's in many academies, And I'm going to use football as an example here. Sometimes there is a desire to see perfection, even in training. And perfection then, at the expense of chaos. And when there's chaos and people are playing and working things out in amongst the chaos, then great things happen because they self-solve, But, quite often we will say, oh, we need decision makers. So what is it in your practice that you're currently doing which actually inhibits decision making? Oh, we need leaders. So what is it at the moment in your environment that is actually curbing leadership? Because if you say you need leadership, what's your current practice? And how are you going to change that in order to draw out more leadership traits? And quite often turning the question around and saying, well, that's amazing. I asked a swim coach, how did you help that athlete come forth when she almost won a medal? And he was like, you can't ask me that. I said, what have you done in your training and preparation to cause such a fall off in performance? It was incredible to watch. And he's like, I said, if your athlete won gold, everyone wants to know how you've won gold. Your athlete has come forth by a fraction. So what is it that you've done that's helped that athlete to come forth? They don't like the question. But it's a lot better, for me, it's better than saying, oh, never mind. Let's actually look at it. What is it about your practice?
Thank you. That's the gentleman here who's got his hand up. The microphone is just coming, sir.
Do you think sports psychology is used as a panacea for instant improvement? And then a second question, how do you teach a team to be adaptive, i.e. in the sports parlance, we won, but we won dirty?
So from a psychological perspective, it's something, and again, going back to the earlier question, it's something that it's a pillar of performance, along with the biology of a human being, the physical, the lifestyle, the technical, tactical. Psychology is part of it. And psychology exists. It exists in the room now. The way in which we talk, the way in which we feel those around us, it's present. With sports psychology, it's like, how does this person help that human interaction? How does that person help the way people think about problems, around working problems out? I still think we need chaos and the ability to have mess in order to help people to become adaptive. But I also think we need to equip them with the tools to recover as well. And so psychology is just part of it. Many people say, I think I'm going to get this the wrong way around, but the mind is the athlete, the body's the vehicle. But it's how people think and how they see things and their ability. I was with an academy manager yesterday who looked at a study by Professor Dave Collins around why some people fail. And the majority of the traits were psychological traits. They weren't physical traits. It was their opinion and how they saw themselves within that. So when we say is psychology, I think the psychologist is part of the team. They don't wear a white coat and sit in the corner and just deal with people with that the coach thinks have got mental issues. They should be supporting the whole team with positive mentality. Okay, it's the whole team. It's not just the players. I get very agitated when I see player mindset, athlete mindset. I'm like, no, team mindset. That includes the boss, that includes the physio, that includes the scientist, that includes the student on whether it's on a deck or everyone's mindset, not just the athlete. Can't just look at the athlete.
We're going to have to draw it to a close, I'm afraid, but we will be around. There'll be some mingling time, hopefully, and I'm hoping Nigel could stay for at least a quick moment of that. But can we put our hands together and thank Nigel for So just to follow up this first part, you've got sports parts you can talk there. If you want to follow up with Nigel, he's even given us his mobile number. This is not me. He's put it there. So if If you're an Australian who might want to ring up the night before the World Cup final and disrupt him, feel free. And we're also developing all these other products I talked around business strategies and product design and so on. So if you want to talk to us about engaging with us in our co-design, feel free. So what's going to happen now is I will think about the ball. I will have a quick think about who wins the ball. I did think about punting it into the audience, but I'm afraid the ceiling might not take it. We have a few minutes break while we just rearrange the furniture, and then we move on to the panel, which is around the broader challenges of how we take these academic ideas and make them work in practice, commercially and otherwise. And that will be led by Sam Steele. So thank you again, Nigel.
Pleasure.